Hey Ben,
Hey Chris, how are you?
how you doing?
Doing well. It's the end of the week, which I'm never going to complain about.
What's that? Short week?
Uh, kind of. I mean, we had MLK off, which is great. We unfortunately on Monday I managed to get T-boned by a truck, so I've been
Oh
dealing
no.
with. So I went from having a day off to dealing with car insurance all day long Monday. So it ended up being basically a full week instead.
Oh no, no. Sorry to hear that. That's terrible. But everything's okay now, right? You're all right.
Oh yeah, yeah, no issues. Definitely lucked out. He hit my passenger side, so um, everyone's fine. Car got totaled immediately, so that car shopping is an adventure in a pandemic. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, I bet. I bet. Luckily, I
So
didn't have to do that. So I feel for you, man. I do.
I I did make the decision yesterday to go with a Tesla though. So I've that's
Nice.
so we're I actually pick it up next week.
You're
It's
not going to wait for the Cybertruck, man? I got my name on the list. End
Well,
of
see,
this year. I can't wait.
2023 or whenever it comes out. Um, I was actually going to buy a Ford Bronco, but they
Oh,
keep
nice.
doing that. And so I went over there, went on Tesla's website, picked up a Model Y, and it took me 30 minutes to actually buy a car and get it
Nice.
delivered. It is the craziest experience I've ever had in my life. Is literally pick out every option on a car you want, and it's officially shipping from California within about 30 minutes with here's your VIN number. I was like, this
Nice.
is
So do they just drive it to your house and drop it off? Is that the way it works? I
Oh,
mean,
I'm gonna
I
head.
get this.
I'm in Birmingham, so I can head to Atlanta to go pick it up, which is fine. It is what it is. But yeah, they. If I lived, I think I have to be over 200 miles away from the nearest service center, and then they would actually drive it to your house. But I'm 100 miles away from Atlanta, so Trek, here I come.
Oh, that kind of sucks. They should just bring it to your door. You should just bring it to your door.
Well, I mean, with the full subs driving, why not just hit a button and send it to me? I mean, like it can do it. Why not?
Exactly. In fact, I think AI should probably detect when you need a new car and just drive a new one up to your door. Like, well, why can't they do that now? I mean, they know everything about us. You know, as soon as we get into an accident, as soon as they find out you're totaled, they should just go, "Hey, here's a bunch of options. Pick one. Just tap the button and boom, we'll deliver it."
I mean, well, so Tesla has car insurance in California, so they offer it for the owners over there. So theoretically, Elon could get into that. He could actually get
Yeah,
to a point where if he didn't text a car, he could actually ship another one directly to your house within minutes of finding or seeing that you had an accident. So
yeah, yeah.
you could,
Exactly. Well, you see, I'm a huge believer in do it for me because everyone's DIY, DIY, DIY. Look, give the customer a tool, let them do the work. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Customer doesn't want to do the work. They
yeah.
want somebody else to do the work, right? So if my systems could do all these things for me and save me time, I'm there.
Well, and that's the reason why I'm embedded in the Apple ecosystem. I have iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple TVs, HomePods, all of it, because it is the hard work is taken care of. I don't have to
Yeah,
worry about how it connects. I don't have to worry about any protocols. I don't have to sign into anything. It just works. And that the simplification, I don't have to worry about things. And that I have so much more in my life that I'd rather spend time on than worrying about how to get this, device to talk to a different device on my network. Like, yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I think that's where a lot of companies sort of that there's a disconnect, right? Because they're over here doing their thing, and the customers over here wanting something completely different, and they're going, "Well, we're not going to come over to you. You got to come over to us." And it's like, "No, no, no. We got to you got to go to them and see what they want, and then just do it for them. And then, if they have a problem with it, push back." It's like, do you remember there was a while back when Sprint got in trouble because it would look through customers' bills and actually say, "Hey, here's a better plan for you. We went through your bill," and the customer's like, "Oh my God, you're going through my bill." It's like if somebody were to do that today, it would be like, "Please do that for me today. I have no time to go through my bill. I would love that."
well, it's the disconnect. It used to be that Steve Jobs was like his famous quote where he talks about the customer doesn't know what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've taken that to an extreme where people just automatically assume that. And I think that's been morphed. I think what he meant is really the customer isn't necessarily aware of what they need, but like you can help them find that. But now we're taking the extreme of like, oh no, just ignore what your customer survey says. That's not true. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like,
Yeah.
you've taken this idea and concept too far.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination. It's right. It's like the customer wants something, you have a vision, you combine those things together, and then you get something that everybody really wants. Or you create this vision and you hand it to your customers, and then they decide whether or not they want to, iterate it or change it or manipulate it to turn it into something that works better for them.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
it's definitely an interesting process, that's for sure.
But I think I just want AI to run my life. Basically, I just want to be able to like get up. I want my coffee ready. I want my food ready. I want, when I run out of eggs, I want the eggs to just show up at the door. I mean, why can't we get to that kind of world? What's stopping us from getting to
there's
that?
nothing. It's actually funny. So my senior thesis project in undergrad, I actually did a whole project based on RFID back in the day, that was 2007, which seems way so long ago now. But
Yeah.
so the idea being that we would eventually replace barcodes with RFID. And so it was actually, I remember seeing it about 2 years later. I think IBM came out with a demo as part of their IBM kitchen or something, where it would detect what was in your fridge and then give you recipes based on what was in there. Or if you were out of something, if you threw it out, it would detect that and then tell you add it to a shopping list. And like all that simplicity is, I don't understand why we don't have that. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, where did it go? I mean, I remember doing a research. I did some work for the Institute for the Future, and we were talking about automated smart fridges, right? And there was a flurry of all this activity a number of years ago, and then all of a sudden it's just gone, and like this disappeared. So, I mean, do you know what happened to that? I mean, if you ask me, I would love one of those things right now.
Well, I think it got down to a point where the big barrier was that barcodes were the only way to really detect was in the fridge, because computer vision wasn't at the point years ago. I think today it's a little bit closer. But back then, barcode was the only way to truly detect what was in the fridge or what was there. And we all thought that, RFID was going to eventually replace that. There were plans for that. I mean, I remember all the research about it. It was like, oh, there's no way this doesn't happen. Because we thought the prices going to get so low that it was basically be like printing a barcode on a piece of paper. It was going to be at that level. And it just hasn't gotten there. And I think that's really been the barrier, is we haven't seen an enabling technology get to the point where the cost is low enough where it provides the value that we could end up using in other places. Instead, you see RFID on places like on the big packages where you're moving around giant pallets of things. That's like how Amazon uses it around their warehouses. I think companies have started to use it, just not on the level that we saw. They're on the more commercial level, not on the retail level.
Right.
But it's disappointing. I was looking forward to it. I mean, my house right now, like, I get up in the morning and tell, Siri, hey, good morning. And literally across the board, lights turn on, temp, turns up, fan turns off, so I don't have to get cold when I get out of bed. Here shortly, my car's going to start starting up here when I actually do that too. Like, I've got it all planned out. And that's the life that I like living, is where things are automated. I don't have to think about it. And I think more and more we're going to see technology get to the point where that ecosystem where you are able to do that, are able to implement that, won't require someone with an Arduino and like 35 Cat5 cables strung around the entire house in order to implement.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're still at that point where you still need to know something to get this stuff done. Because I remember, I bought a smart bulb a little while back, and whenever the internet dies, I have to reprogram the damn smart bulb. It's like, it should be so easy. You just screw it in, it reconnects to a nearby network, and boom, you're done. But we're not quite there yet. It should just work, but it just doesn't quite work yet.
Well, I think we're seeing more and more. The smart bulbs are definitely a big one, because I think, between Hue lights, and there's a lot of competitors now. I swear, every time I either go to like Walmart or Target or any of these other retails, they have 35 brands of smart bulbs now. It used to be there were like one or two. And so the more we see of this, the more we're going to start to get to a point where those protocols are going to get standardized. We're going to start to see people really get on board, and there's going to be customer demand. Because it used to be, all right, I'm going to get an Alexa device and I'm going to get a smart bulb, and that's how they'd start out. And in fact, I actually remember seeing kits around Christmas and Thanksgiving they were bundled together for basically nothing. And that intro into it is how we start to get more people involved. And then when you build customer demand, more people can be like, why is it so complicated? And that's where you start to see things change.
Yeah, well, even in the last few years, I mean, I've had an Alexa for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, and even since then, since I first bought one, there's been so much of advancement in the smart devices and smart plugs and this and that. It's gotten better. I still need to be technical to know how to work them properly, but they're definitely a lot better than they used to be.
Yes, hands down. And in fact, actually, I bought a couple of Alexa devices for my mom, my dad, and set them up this year for them, so they didn't have to worry about that hard aspect. And put in some smart bulbs. And even though my mom gets into fights with the Alexa here and there, like they're working through it. My dad will call me up here and there, and he's like, "Your mom's arguing with the Alexa again." I'm like, wait, it's you just tell her what you wanted to play and you tell her what you wanted to do. It's not complicated. And he's like, she's yelling in the other room. I went to the other room. And I was like, all right, here.
Well, I think my biggest beef is that it still doesn't I guess the speech recognition is still not there. Sometimes I ask a pretty simple question and it starts like, just now I asked for some music and it was like listing off names of some band. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're doing, but it just kept listing off people's names. And I'm like, who are these people? What is this?
Yeah, that technology, I think, well, in general, the idea of natural language processing is something that has literally gone light years in advancement in the past 2 years. So I expect we'll start to see some more of that in Alexa type devices, in the Google Homes, the Amazon Home, or the Apple Home Pods. All those will start to come in here shortly, and that's going to be exciting because I know what we're seeing on the AI modeling side on just the text recognition and the understanding of what that means from natural language process perspective, what that's going to mean for voice in the consumer end. When it gets there, it's going to be life-changing for a lot of people, where it's no longer just I have a structured sentence I have to say. It's now I can understand context. I understand the way you phrase this is slightly different, so it actually means this. And you start to get into regionality within the language itself. And there's so much more coming that's exciting. And it gives me goosebumps to think that like here in a number of years, we're going to be a point where probably within the next like year and a half, where the device that we have today is going to be completely drastically different, like just across the board in the way you interact with it. You won't need to do half of what you have to do today, and that's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
I think the biggest problem for me is the proactivity, because you're always asking it to do this and you're asking it to do that. Now, routines are a good stopgap, because right now I can just say, wake up, go to sleep, or whatever, and it just does a whole bunch of stuff in a row, which is great. But it still doesn't know, like when I've walked into the room, it should be able to just detect, hey, Chris is home, fire up this channel, like put this music on, start the coffee, whatever. It should be able to get to that point yet. And I don't know why it's like, I think the technology to do that is there. I think it can sense when you walk into a room, right? I mean, it can hear rustling or whatever, and it should be able to trigger things, but it's almost like they're sort of stepping back and going, well, let's still let the user kick it off, right? Even though we're not sure, because they might think it's a little creepy, but you're already listening to everything I'm saying anyway. So why not just do things for me? I mean, how come we're not there yet?
I think you actually hit the nail on the head. It's not that the technology is not there. It's not that we can't do it. It's that creep factor that they're worried about. They're worrying about introducing it too quickly. Like I know right now I've set up some location-based awareness within HomeKit, where if I get to the house, if I've left the house, I've left the proximity, and I come back into that, it then prompts me, because it doesn't want to open up my doors, but prompts me, do you want to go ahead and run this routine where it opens up my garage door, unlocks all my doors, turns on lights, and so forth. And then within the house, I have I've got an Ecobee smart thermostat, and in each room I have a little motion sensor that detects temperature, so it can control temperature within the house. But it also integrates back to where it does motion, and I can set up some routines off of that. So at night after like 8 p.m., if I walk into my bedroom, it turns off the lights in the rest of the house, because it's automatically assuming, all right, he's getting ready to go to bed. We're going to go ahead and start that process. So there's some ways of doing it, but you have to still know the technical aspects. You have to know how to integrate. You have to know that complicated things we were talking about a second ago that most consumers don't know yet. It's not as routine based. It's not as easy to understand. Okay, I need to go in here. I need to select this motion device, and then I want to set these criteria. And it's a lot more complicated than it needs to be. And then on top of that, you have to have all the enabling technologies, which a lot of people have maybe one or two. They don't have all of them. So.
Yeah, well, that's one thing. They should have new homes that are pre-built with all this stuff in it. So the moment you just walk in, you key your phone to the door, and then boom, everything is like done for you. But I mean, and my belief is like, I think part of it is because we still don't know enough about the customer. We still don't know enough. We don't have big enough data sets, right? We need more more data, because if we don't have enough data, then we don't really know what they're actually doing, right? Like you said, you have to have a sensor in the room. You have to have, have to have cameras. You have to have, it's like, it still doesn't have enough sense to understand what we're doing if it just hears us walking into a room, as opposed to, seeing and feeling us walking into a room, right?
But I think you're also still getting back to the creep factor, because you think about the technology. I'm thinking back to the Apple HomePod, where it has enough location awareness to understand how to adjust the sound on the big version they have based on what's in the room. So if you put a new object in the room, it can detect that object and change the way that it's distributing the sound. So we have things that can do that. Your phone can even do that to understand, all that. But then we're getting back to, the old, have you heard the Target marketing story where they detected where a 16-year-old girl was pregnant? Yeah, I think if you've ever taken a marketing class in grad school, everyone knows this story about the idea of using big data to know something before a customer does. And I think I look back at that was a number of years ago, but that one, like, we have the data to be able to do this. It's, the ethical and the appearance and all these other things that we have to deal with that are rightfully questions that we need to be asking, but at the same time, they're also limiting in a lot of ways for some real advancements in, consumer ease of use.
Right.
There's a
I'm also of the mind that we're kind of past that already. I mean, didn't Scott McNeely say privacy is dead? So I think everyone already knows what everyone's doing. Anyway, so maybe we can get past that. But so you're telling me that you hate AI and big data. What's wrong with those words? Come on, they're accurate, aren't they?
I don't hate the two topics. I hate the words. I swear, every day I hear from a vendor, they use the word AI, and then you get into it, and they're using 6 different if statements. It's like, no. Like, an if statement is not artificial intelligence. That's not how this works. I feel like, what's the commercial where the old lady in front of the wall saying, that's not how this works, that's not how any of this works. That is me on a daily basis with some of these conversations. So I get really frustrated because it is such a buzzword that everyone wants to attach it to it. And it's frustrating. And big data has been the same way, where I feel like not as much anymore, because people started to catch on that big data is not the end all be all. But we were in a position where, we'll just put, you just need big data and you can figure out that problem. It's like, no, like, that's not the solution here. And so both of the words have gotten to a point where they're just band-aids for really truly how do we solve a problem. And it's very frustrating, because I think you have to unwrap those conversations with people and be like, no, hold on a second, let's backtrack. Let's start to get into what's actually happening here, and let's get into how you're actually executing it, or what your actual problem is. And let's not just throw the latest buzzword at this because you think it sounds fancy. I listened to a couple pitch competitions, and I'll bring some people over, well, pre-pandemic anyway, and we'd print out bingo cards, and literally I'd put, AI, big data, IoT, all these words on a bingo card, and we'd scramble them up, and we would play bingo listening to some of these pitch competitions, because the buzzwords they're going to say, and half the time they don't even mean anything. But like, we had a grand old time just sitting there, just drinking wine, and then just listening to people talk about these buzzwords. And you're like, no, that's whatever, okay. But it's kind of been the nature of technology in all the ways. Everyone wants to talk about AI. Everyone wants to talk about big data, and it doesn't matter whether or not behind the scenes it's actually occurring. It's the perception that if you're not using those words, that your company is not relevant, that you're not actually at the cutting edge, when that's really not the case. I think there was a statistic from, I think it was 2018, where from the insurance market, 4 out of 5 executives were talking about how big data or AI was going to be a big thing for them. But then we're sitting there, and like 90% of them have never put a single model into production. So like, there's a disconnect here, where we start using terms, not understanding, all right, what's the actual implementation of this, and what's actually occurring here in these companies. So that's my frustration.
Yeah. It's like people throwing around the terms quantum computing or something like that, when it's like, do they even know what that is?
No. Yes, that one, I think that might be the third word that's going to get added to my list here very, very shortly, based on what I'm saying. But honestly, that one actually excites me more than anything else we've seen. We had some conversations with some of our leadership, and they're asking about, what about 5G? And it's like, I don't, 5G is great. But like, quantum is where things actually get exciting. When we truly get to quantum computing, that's a game changer. And I don't think people understand, like, some people in technology truly understand what that means. And I think a lot of people just hear the term like, oh, cool, new fancy buzzword. And it's like, no, this is this literally can be life-changing in so many different ways. And if
Yeah.
we truly get it to the point where we're talking about getting it to, it's going to revolutionize so many industries.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to it. The way I've always kind of described it was like, you know, 5G is basically, you know, taking us to a position where you're on the Autobahn. You can get from Germany to Poland super fast when you've got like 35 lanes now instead of, you know, a 4-lane highway. And that's kind of the way 5G is. And then quantum is basically, there's a rocket ship over in Poland that's going to shoot you off over to Jupiter. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
way that I like to describe it from a
Yeah.
symbolism perspective, because that's the difference in the technologies. Is one's really helping us and it's fantastic, and it's going to be, you know, definitely game changing for a lot of things. The other one is taking us to a completely different world, and
Right.
that's the exciting thing. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing what Google and Honeywell of all companies, you know, and the rest of these, IBM, seeing what they come out with here and watching it very closely, because I know from our industry, it really will change a lot of things, and it's exciting.
Well, yeah. Well, you're in a highly regulated space too, right? I mean, I've worked with banks before, so I mean, I know that they have a big problem with innovation, right? There's like, oh, they can only do so much because they feel like they're in this box, but there's so much that they can do that they're just not doing because they feel constricted by the regulatory environment. You're in the same space, right? Or you're similarly regulated.
Yeah, so insurance is regulated at a state level. So you look
Right.
at banks, and they're really regulated at a federal level. We're regulated at a state level, which means that instead of being a bank where you have one giant regulation body, I've got to deal with 50, which adds a whole level of complexity to it. But it's definitely, it makes it challenging in a lot of ways. But I think that also presents a lot of opportunities. I think, you know, you see things, and yes, you have to do things X, Y, and Z way, but there's this area where the regulations don't have, that you do have the capability of moving forward with, but people are a little scared. You know, insurance in itself, we are risk adverse by nature. Our entire
Yeah.
business model is literally, how do you avoid risk?
Yeah.
There's an old Steve Carell movie a while back where he's a insurance adjuster, where he's trying to avoid all risk as possible in his life, and then goes the complete opposite direction. But like
Ooh, I
that
would watch
previous,
that. I don't know what that's called, but I would watch that. Steve Carell is an insurance adjuster. That would be cool.
I think the name of it. It was a funny movie because I remember watching it. It was hilarious. But yeah, it's like the whole idea of avoiding risk, living this bubble life was his entire thing, and then he goes off skydiving.
Yeah.
And but like that's kind of the nature of our industry, is where we're very much risk adverse. And historically speaking, a lot of our customers, it's a long tail industry. I mean, someone will buy a policy when they're 20, and then we're not, you know, interacting with their beneficiaries until, you know, they were over 80. So we're talking like a 60-year gap. And I think so a lot of people are really slow to change a lot of things, because I mean, right now we're dealing with data from, you know, the 1950s and 60s. And so you've got to kind of you got to figure out how to interact with that, how to move around that. But at the same time, because of all that data and because of all the things that we've gathered over the years, it presents a lot of opportunity that we can leverage and we can interact with. We do have the ability to push boundaries. So I mean, we've had mainframe systems for, you know, I don't even know how long at this point,
Yeah.
way before I was even born, probably. And I think with that being said, like, yes, you don't want to replace those because it'll cost us, you know, tens and 20s and hundreds of millions of dollars to replace. But you can start to pull things out of there. You can start to utilize things like microservices. That's not really changing what you're doing. It's not really, you know, completely shutting everything out and switching over to a new system. You're actually starting to pull pieces away, and you can really start to utilize that to enable innovation within the space.
Right.
So I think that's the thing, is you start to find those small wins, and then as you start to piece out those different pieces, you suddenly end up with this whole set of, you know, services or innovation within the company that you didn't previously had, just by picking off a little piece here and there. And I think that's the approach that a lot of insurance companies, a lot of banks as well, you have to take. You have to find those areas that you can just pull a piece off, a piece here, and all of a sudden you end up with this really drastic change that you didn't even realize you were kind of heading down, you know, a year or two before. So
Yeah.
it has its challenges.
Are you finding that your space does your space feel uncompetitive? Like you feel like you're like completely invincible in space? I mean, you have a lot of competition.
Well, I think there's some high barriers to entry for sure. And you think about insurance, and you have a certain amount of money and capital that you have to have on the back end in order to really insure someone, and that's regulated. So we have to have cash reserves, and we have to
Right.
have liquid assets. And so that really eliminates the possibility that a startup could come in and be like, hey, we've raised $1 million and we're going to go take over the world. That's you're going to have a really hard time with that, only because so many of these companies have been in the space. We've been here for 113 years or 114 years now. You look at someone like a Liberty, you look at someone like a Lincoln, you look at all these, or Mass Mutual, all these companies that have been around for 50 to 100 years. They've been around for so long that they really have created this barrier to entry only because of the regulatory environment.
Right.
What you're seeing instead is you're seeing these startups come in and be competitive by partnering with the big players. So they come in, they're like, hey, we've got this fantastic product. We want you to back us, and we want to utilize, you're going to take an equity stake, and we're going to utilize your backing financially in order to put this out there. And I think that's really where you're seeing the change. Is it's not like, Amazon, or even think about like social media. It's not like a new TikTok coming about. Like, that's not the way this is going to be approached. It's really going to be a completely different move here, where a startup's going to come up, partner with a big player, and that's how you're going to see some drastic change. But we do see it's very competitive because the market's shrinking. Typically within insurance, there are a couple of big life events that happen that people buy insurance. You either get married, you buy a house, or you have a kid. And people in their 20s and 30s aren't getting married, they're not buying houses, and they're not having kids. So it kind of puts us in a place where the key drivers for our product aren't occurring. So, what new products are you having to come out with? How are you really adapting to those markets? And I think a lot of the insurance market is really starting to see, all right, we can't continue to do things the way we've done things. And from my perspective, that's exciting because I get to play around with the new technologies and figure out ways of approaching things differently. So we have the freedom to kind of go out there and do that. But at the same time, I do think it's a little scary for some of the big companies because, I work with people that have been at the company for 40 years and they've done the same thing for the 40 years. And that's not the way we can operate anymore. And I think that's the same thing across the board, is you can't operate the same way you did. And I enjoy it. I enjoy the change. I enjoy the challenge, but I think it does scare some people. It's not the cush, utility job that I think some people used to think it used to be. You don't just go to the power company in the insurance industry anymore.
Yeah.
So I enjoy it.
Ask me, a lot of these companies have been around for a while. They seem stable, but the reality, they're probably less stable than some of these startups that are out there, because at least there's a more defined market or whatever. But how do you actually get innovative products like actually out the door in companies like yours? Because is leadership, you obviously need some champion in leadership to help move these things forward, or are there other ways of doing it?
There are a couple of approaches. One, you use leadership, and leadership wants to try and put something out new, change things up and go that route. I think we've seen a couple other models where one of the other models is really creating like an incubator company and really branching it out and providing support services for that company and just letting them go completely separate. So I think Liberty Mutual had one, I believe, where they kind of took a complete branch off of the company and really just created this new entity that was backed by Liberty that, it was nationwide. Sorry, it was nationwide. E-insurance, where they took the completely separate out. It was completely focused on just the digital platform. It was all digital all across the board. Customer service was digital. You couldn't really call anyone. Everything was app-based, and they broke it out that way. So even though Nationwide had backed it and they were the ones really providing supportive services, it was a completely separate entity in a lot of ways. And so leadership is a little bit more open to that because there's not a risk to the brand, which is something they're always concerned with. They don't want to ruin a brand name. So you create a new brand out there and allow the company to really stretch and see if something does exist. And I think we're going to find more companies going that route. Because I think companies need to find new and innovative products to put out there, and they don't want to interfere with what people view as a stable brand. They don't want to start something up. Hey, we got this fantastic product, and then 3 months later close it down because they're like, oh, no one's using this, or it didn't work, or they don't want the mud on the vase situation because the industry has been so stable. So they don't want to create this view of instability of the company at all. A lot of the work is done through brokers. And so there's a relationship built there, and you don't want to ruin that. You don't want people to think, oh, well, yeah, they've got a great rate, but they had to close down this other product previously, so maybe they're not doing so well. You don't want to create that image. So creating this sub company is, I think, something we're going to see a lot more people do, just to completely separate that brand recognition.
But don't they understand that the whole point of innovation is to replace what you're currently doing with what you will be doing? So it's like, I think there's a lot of fear of it, of cannibalization, right? They're like, oh, it's going to take our business from our main business, but that's what you want. I mean, you eventually want to transfer all of your business to the new entity, right? I mean, how do you get over that thinking?
I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of people. I mean, we look, and direct to consumer is going to be the way of the future. I think if you ask anyone in the industry, they will agree that direct to consumer is the way that things will happen in the future. But they don't want to be in a position where their current bread and butter of brokers and dealers are going to feel like we're trying to get around them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem they're trying to figure out, is how do you do both without upsetting the current group that you currently are using. And I don't think anyone has really done it very successfully yet. Which is why I think people have been afraid to really do it. I think the first person who does it, and they do it successfully, everyone else is going to follow. But no one has done it successfully, so they don't want to. They don't want to be the first player. Back to the risk aversion. Like, I don't want to be the first one. I will let someone else jump in the deep end first. We'll let them fail. But I think you see the same thing. So within the insurance industry, there's a product called long-term care, which we're seeing a lot of claims against, that there was a huge impact to the market because of that. And because a lot of companies, they saw an opportunity to jump in the middle and jump in the deep end first, so to speak, and it came back to bite them because they weren't pricing it correctly. And so I think you're seeing a lot of people that are like, we saw what happened here. We don't want to jump into this. We're just going to kind of wait and see,
Yeah.
Which is frustrating, but it is what it is. And at the same time, it provides us opportunities to innovate in other areas until we are ready to make that leap.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, how do you, I keep hearing people say, especially in financial services, we have to de-risk innovation. But it's like, how can you de-risk innovation when innovation basically is risk? Unless you take risks, you're not innovating. So, I mean, there's got to be a way of like helping people to get out of that box.
I think the big thing is you got to be able to show value and prove out concepts and prove that a product or a proof of concept is going to work and is viable. It does have a support, going into it. I think there's a lot more due diligence involved. It's not like we're not Google, where we can put something out there, test and learn and pull it back, 6 months later and ruin my life by removing Google Reader. So like, I think that's the situation. We don't have that same luxury. But what we can do is actually, we can create sandbox environments. We can stand up a environment that is very similar to our production environment with similar data sets that we can be able to show the processes, show that, and improve it out a little bit more. So we do have to kind of take those extra steps that you wouldn't normally have to take with a lot of other companies. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Like, from my perspective, that just means that the idea that we do go to production with is one that has been vetted multiple times, and is one we know is going to work and is going to provide value to the company. We're not putting something out there that is just like, oh, we'll wait and see what happens. So yes, it's a struggle by having to go through those extra hoops, but it's beneficial too. And I think if you're in a company that's willing to kind of give you a little bit of flexibility to, maybe not push it all the way through 35 different test cycles, but maybe go through like 5 or 6 and give you a little bit more runway there, and you figure out ways of, testing in production using pilot groups, truly using a change management program appropriately, you can start to implement innovation a little bit quicker. I know we've, at COVID, we had a couple situations with a couple projects. We actually did a POC in under 36 hours for a product, and then spent the next month and a half actually taking it over to production. And we've been running in production ever since then. But I think, that stress allowed us some flexibility that would have probably taken us, a good couple of weeks otherwise. But at the same time, I do think we are in an environment that we've set up that we can do things like that, where we can move a little bit quicker. When you do have those extra resources available to say, hey, here's some actual data that's not going to harm your production environment. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what the processes are. Here's what the integrations are. Go try this out. Let's see what we can do, and let's test and learn. And then management is on board with you playing around a little bit. I think that's the other part. A lot of these companies, they're going to stack your priority list with 65 number ones. Number ones is like across the board, which is frustrating. But at the same time, that's kind of the way a lot of these companies work. And so, you have to create the capacity for innovation. So you have to be sitting in a space where you're going to give your team the ability to actually play around with things, test and learn, have them get exposed to new technologies, encourage them. I think too often we're thinking about, all right, what project can we get done? What's the next task? What are we doing today to ensure that we know the next technology, we know what's required from a foundational perspective, we understand how it works. And here in 2 years, when we're ready to implement it, we've already had people doing POCs for, you know, a good 2 years that are just maybe bubblegum wrap and wrapping paper kind of POCs, but we understand it and we understand where things are heading and we know the right time to jump into it. And so we've been around it, we've been playing. And I think that's the key to all this, is really not losing sight of where the future is by creating capacity in order to play with it, in addition to creating an environment where you can play.
Right. So let's say you're a budding entrepreneur or intrapreneur within an organization, right?
Yep.
And you're saying, okay, how do I get some of these innovations pushed forward? I mean, what do you recommend? I mean, what if leadership is recalcitrant? Like, how do you move forward? How do you start this bubble growing?
I think you got to find your first win. And then we all talk about, oh, you start a snowball effect, you find that first little one. And that's really what it is. I know from our perspective, we had a couple very small projects that were very small proof of concepts. Someone was working nights and weekends on just to kind of get it done outside the daily job, just because we saw the value. We knew this was going to provide a massive amount of value to the company. And so we spent extra hours working on it because we weren't really giving the time during our daily job. So after that happened, after we showed the value, said, hey, look at what we did literally on nights and weekends. Give us some time during the day and we could do so much more. And I think that's when that conversation made it a lot easier. We weren't having to argue as like, oh, well, this might be able to happen. It's like, no, we were working Friday night till like 8 p.m. We were working Saturday from noon to like 4 for like a couple weekends in a row. Here's what we came up with. If you gave us 40 hours during a week, just imagine the possibilities. And that conversation is so much easier. Just across the board. It's a hard thing to argue against at that point when you've showed that, you know, with the hours you put in outside, that, hey, internally you give this and we can definitely do more. Now, granted, you got to kind of balance that because, you know, sometimes people want to say, oh, just keep working nights and weekends. But like, that's, you got to kind of figure that one out.
I know I've had bosses that have done that. It's like, yeah, just keep doing it in your spare time. You know, that's fine. 110%, right?
Yeah.
But I think you hit the nail on the head right there when you said value, right? Because a lot of times when you know, innovators, we're into cool stuff, we're into new stuff, we're into, you know, cutting edge things, but a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily have like immediate value to the organization. But so you have to sort it out. You have to say, okay, here's the cool stuff that doesn't have immediate value, but here's the stuff that has in like near-term value. And that's the stuff that is like, you know, a lot easier to get pushed through. And, you know, even if you might have to, you know, hold your breath and go, well, I don't really want to work on this, but look at the, you know, that, like you say, a quick win, the first thing you do is bring in the high value stuff, show the ROI, and then, you know, floodgates might open, or at least it might crack open a little bit more.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that we're doing with my team right now. We have you know, part of the time is dedicated to the CBA defined projects. You know, here's a defined capability. We know we can produce value. It is very simple, like straightforward. Some of these are pretty, some of these aren't pretty. Some of these are just projects that need to get done that are in this, you know, either machine learning or emerging technology space. And then we have time dedicated to experimentation. So we've actually, you know, my team, they have once a quarter, they've got to come up with a new technology that we don't have internally, a new capability that they've got to run a POC on, that they've got to dedicate part of their time to. And that's something we're making sure they have capacity to do, because, you know, this quarter, you know, we've got a couple doing a couple POCs on blockchain, which within insurance is something that no one's really found a good thing for. And I'm waiting to see.
Nobody's afraid of it like they are in financial services. I mean, when you hear the word blockchain, they're okay with, but if you hear the word Bitcoin, they're like freaking out. They go, don't even say that word. Don't even say that word.
Well, and I think that's from our perspective internally, that's the one thing that we're also trying to make sure of is like, so leadership, they immediately hear blockchain and they immediately think Bitcoin. And that's, they're not, yes, Bitcoin is blockchain, but they are different. And I think one of the things that we're trying to make sure we do is education. So our leaders need to be educated. So when we come in there, we're like, hey, we're going to run a POC on blockchain. We're going to kind of, you know, I'm waiting to see what's going to come of it and what the use case is going to be, but we're going to run a POC. We're going to put this out there, and then we're going to really teach you about it. We're going to tell you what it is. We're going to explain what it does. We're going to explain how it could work within Protective in our company. And then we're also going to tell you exactly what a vendor is probably going to tell you it does and why they're wrong. and really we want our leaders in a position where they are educated enough to hear things in the environment, hear things from another company, hear things from a vendor, hear things just in the newspaper, and be able to talk about it intelligently. And that's kind of where we see some of these new experimental projects from our team really fitting in, is that education phase, in addition to creating a foundation for those technologies to eventually come into the company.
Yeah. Speaking of education, you mentioned something about the 4-year degree. And what is it? Where does the 4-year degree fit into the future of the IT workforce? And I would say it doesn't, but you have a different opinion.
Well, it's a little mixed. On one end, I say this because I've got 3 master's degrees, but like,
nice.
Well, I'm like, oh, you don't need a 4-year degree, and then I've got 3 masters, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna believe what you're saying. But I think the one thing I've seen is, I've interacted with people and I work with people who don't have a 4-year degree. They don't have a formal education. And if you have the drive, the resources are out there today where you don't need that. Whether you take a boot camp, whether you take Pluralsight or online learning, or you take some of these MOOCs, like there's opportunities to learn all this information and never get a 4-year degree. And I think too many employers are requiring that still. And I think that's something we need to change, because we're seeing that there are some really smart people that just don't want to go to college. They don't want the debt. They don't want to sit in the classroom. They want to get to work, and they want to figure out a way they can really, make a difference. And that needs to change within the industry, and within America in general. We need to get to a point where it's not saying, all right, you're in IT, you need a bachelor's at least, and that's not the case anymore. So I'm hoping we'll see some changes there, but we'll see. I think it's definitely a struggle. Too many companies have been requiring a bachelor's degree for forever. And it's a hard argument to make. I know it was one, luckily we've had a leadership within our company where it was an easy discussion. We got that removed pretty quickly, but I know other companies within our ecosystem here that are basically refusing to do it. And it's frustrating because I'm involved with a couple of local workforce development groups, and they're pushing out some students through some of these free initiatives that are extremely intelligent kids. They're adults, but they're pushing them out, and they come out with backgrounds in C# and JavaScript and React and C++ and all these different languages, and they can really make a difference for a company that needs some junior level talent, because you can't just continue to hire senior level people. That's not sustainable. And so, but because they don't have a 4-year degree, we're not willing to give them a chance. But I have seen places where companies who have switched that up and they have hired some of those people who are coming out of these different types of workforce programs, those people are actually providing more value than you can even imagine. One, they're typically more loyal. You give someone a chance that didn't have an opportunity before, and they're going to be super loyal to you. They're going to work harder than someone who's, honestly, most of the time I think they work harder than people who have 4-year degrees, from what I've seen coming out. I mean, I don't want to make the generalization, but based on what you see, sometimes that's the case. A lot of people, they've had to fight for everything in their life, and they really want to fight for this. And it's fun to see. And I'm hoping more companies change that. Because I do think a 4-year degree it's not a complete waste, but it should be a requirement. Let's put it that way.
Well, especially in the tech field, where this stuff just changes so quickly. And I mean, Stack does a review every year of the most popular languages, and they ask a couple of other questions, and one is on education, right? And I think it was like 75% of the programmers on Stack are self-taught. I'm like, they have some base, they might have a degree, they might have an English degree, but they're JavaScript coders, and they're self-taught, and it's like 75%. And then I think the next one is college, but still, I mean, that's a huge amount if you think about it.
Well, and I think that's the other piece there. The computer industry and IT industry changes so rapidly, and curriculum within a college takes forever to change. I know I've talked with a couple of our local institutions. Getting them to adapt their curriculum is a multi-year process. I mean, just straight up, it takes years to do. It is a hard thing to do. If we want a new program added, it is hard. It is not easy. And I think that's the struggle, is like online, you can go produce a video on the newest language within, a week that provides a ton of value, basically what you would get from a textbook that everyone can watch for free, versus having to wait 2 years for a college to produce basically the same thing via textbook. And
Yeah.
it's definitely, it moves at a much slower pace. And I think we're going to have to see, I imagine that we'll see higher education in the IT world anyway, change the way they're really teaching. Because I think they're going to start to realize that there's a way that they should be teaching, and what they should be teaching is less about, how does C# set up? What is in C++? Unfortunately, I took a class back in the day about assembler and Fortran.
Oh man.
Which
I remember Fortran.
I joke because it was, I forget the name of the class actually was. I always refer to it as my ancient programming class. And then I talk with people at work and they're actually using assembly language. And I'm like, sorry, I took that in the ancient class. But I think that's the thing is, like, I think you're going to see a switch from really teaching languages and see a switch to more conceptual and really the management aspect and understanding kind of more the algorithm base and really the science component of it, and less about how do you program in C#. And I think when we make that switch from higher education, the value of that degree is going to be much more valuable for people who are trying to get a little bit more advanced and trying to be a little bit different in their approach to their career. And I hope to see that change. But we'll see.
I think that needs to happen because the languages are always changing, but the foundations are the same, right? I mean, if you're like, for example, I'm a Visual Basic guy, and then eventually went into about 2009. I had a startup where I learned Ruby on Rails in like 6 weeks, and we got a software up, and then I didn't do anything for a long time, and then I thought, well, Python looks interesting, let me pick it up. But as long as you have the fundamentals of what the stuff works, it's just like learning it's easier than learning another language because the constructs are similar. Like my big problem was between functional or object oriented. Once I got over that hurdle, it was easy. But I think you're right. As long as the concepts are taught and they understand the concepts, then the language of the year you should be able to learn the next one and easily pick it up.
Oh yeah, no, I was the exact same way. I think my base language in college was Java, which is a horrible language. I'm sorry for anyone.
It is. It's still number one, though. It's still number one.
No, but like it shouldn't be. It's so bad.
No.
So my base language was Java, and then I picked up C++ and C#, but it was super easy to translate all those skills because the way it was taught to me was very much on a conceptual basis and understanding really overall how the languages are constructed. And so picking up a new language was super easy. I mean, a couple weeks, like you said, and you could pick up something new, which was nice because I look back and I took Spanish in middle school, high school, and in college, and I still don't know a word. But like I can pick up a new computer language in a week. I always get my mom always gives me a hard time about that because she's like, I put you through so many years of Spanish and you can't speak anything when we go to Mexico. I'm like, sorry, didn't work that way. But computer language, and I think that's the thing. I think that is where you see the value of a 4-year degree more so than where it is with some schools today.
Very cool. So foresight time, 2031. Where are we going to be in 2031? 10 years from now. Go.
I think you will see. Autonomous driving is going to become a thing very quickly. I think the data set that we're seeing that Tesla has with the billions of miles of data being tracked right now, it's hard for me to see that we don't see full self-driving within the next 3 to 4 years. Realistic full self-driving. I think that has the ability to change the auto industry in a way that Uber has kind of changed the taxi industry. Because I think what you see is the lack of a need for owning a vehicle when you can just call up a vehicle that doesn't need a driver. And I think that we're going to see a change there. I don't know how prolific it's going to be, but I do think we're going to see that. I was thinking that we were years away from seeing full self-driving on streets. I expected on highways. They're a lot easier to understand from an AI perspective. It makes sense. But seeing some of the latest videos I've seen from the full self-driving betas from Tesla right now and some of the other car companies, we are super close, a lot closer than I was expecting. So I really think that's going to be a thing very quickly. I also think, the new normal here is going to be interesting to see. I think most companies have adapted this hybrid approach moving forward once we're back from getting out of this pandemic. I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to be in a position where most people are going to end up working out of their homes to at least some part of the time. I don't see us going back in the office full time. I think the office environment for IT professionals is drastically going to change. We've proven that we can work remotely. We're proven that we're just as effective. and the work-life balance is becoming a lot more important for people. So you're going to see the demand for it more and more and more. And I think that's going to be the way things happen. And with that, I think you're going to see an interesting mix of what happens in Silicon Valley. I think as people don't want to pay those home prices in Silicon Valley, what are they going to do? The same thing goes in places like Austin. Yeah. I mean, but it's a thing. It's like, all of a sudden home prices, why am I going to pay that to live in New York City when I can work from home? I don't want to work out of a 500 square foot apartment in New York City. I'd rather work in, well, I wouldn't say New Jersey, but like maybe Philadelphia or something like that, and have a much bigger place. I say that as someone who's from New Jersey, by the way, just putting that out there. But I mean, that's the thing. And so I think you're going to see a geography change from the population because they don't have to be in an office. And that's exciting to me, because I think a lot of the communities that have been up and coming, that, a place like Nashville, a place like Raleigh and some of these other places that are below what we would typically think of as like a tech mecca, but has a really huge set of city like features and benefits that all people love, whether it's a food scene, the outdoor scene. I think all of that suddenly becomes much more attractive, and people are just going to start to move around. It's going to be interesting. I think from the tech side, this continued progression that we're seeing of kind of going back to the cloud is going to hit a limit. I don't, as much as we want to put in the cloud, I think you're seeing a lot of companies starting to realize it's expensive, and it's not the end all be all. It's great for scaling. It makes it great for a growth company, but some of these established companies, there's a place for the cloud, and you're going to see that utilized, but it's not going to be everywhere. You're going to still see a maintenance of an on-prem data center. And I think what we've seen back in the 80s, everything was terminal based, and then we went PC, and now we're kind of back with virtual desktops to being terminal based. So we keep seeing these fluctuations of trends, whether it's the bell bottoms from the 80s, whatever, coming back now. Like the same thing's happening with tech, where we're seeing this life cycle approach to a technology's approach. And I think we're going to see the same thing kind of going in the next 10 years, where some of the things that we thought were outdated, we won't see again, are going to kind of make their way back in different forms and fashions. And it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure what technologies are going to come back from the 80s. I'm hoping floppy disks are officially out all the way. But, we are going to see some things coming back. And that it's definitely, I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see where technology goes. I think quantum is the other one. I don't know if we'll achieve actual quantum computing. I know we keep talking that we have, which is everyone debates. But I think we're going to get pretty close in the next 10 years. And that's super exciting for me, because I know that, like I said before, that's revolutionary in a lot of ways. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to see like a couple of things you mentioned there, like edge and 5G, right? Where things are just going to be decentralized. Because I think we've got a situation now where the centralization is actually going to start being a negative, right? Because there's going to be these situations where, like you say, everything is going to be up in the cloud, but we're going to have so much power at the edge that there's no need for that. I mean, you're going to have, and especially with autonomous vehicles, right? I mean, what if the autonomous vehicle lost connection with the internet, right? When it was driving, it needs to have all of the computing power that it needs to make decisions in the actual box itself. So, I think edge computing, 5G, 6G, whatever is after that is really going to change like the whole way technology is thought of. And, I'm totally in line with you there. I wish autonomous vehicles were here today, because there's so many damn bad drivers out there. I would love to be able to just get them all off the road.
Seriously. I saw some things out of CES this year where they were talking about the way vehicles are going to communicate in the future. And I think that's exciting. Like we get to a point where every car can talk to every other car. And it doesn't matter if you're in a fully autonomous car or if you're someone that's driving your own car, where everyone knows spatially where everyone else is and understands what's happening. And that's the kind of the spot where you're talking about like the edge computing, the addition of 5G, where everything can communicate at high speeds. And suddenly, a car 100 yards away, if it gets into an accident, everyone behind them immediately knows to slow down, and no one gets into an accident behind them. And that's the potential that we have with everything where it's heading right now. That's fun. It's a much safer future. It's an exciting future, and it's one where I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where it goes.
Yeah, I think if you take emotions out of driving, it becomes a much calmer thing.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot of things that computers can do better than humans. So, well, this has been awesome. A great conversation. So tell us, like, how do people get in touch with you if they want to? Is like LinkedIn profile or?
Yeah, LinkedIn profile, and then my other one's Instagram. I'm always on Instagram, so those two are the big ones.
What do you do? What do you do on Instagram? I just post pictures of books I've read. What do you do on there?
It's usually travel pictures and then usually memes. Those are the two things that are on Instagram.
Oh, I love memes. Memes are great.
You got to stay light. I kind of got away from Facebook. Everything's too heavy and political on there. Instagram is just full of funny memes, which is currently nothing but Bernie Sanders these days, and is out for the inauguration. So like
that picture,
it's so much better. I've seen him on like the Game of Thrones throne. Like it's amazing. And like the uplifting side of Instagram is where I enjoy spending my time for sure.
The internet is the most awesome invention we have ever made. Well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Great talking with you. Thanks. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.